I've picked on TheGamer many times throughout the years, and I feel like it's unfair to say I pick on them. I respond to the garbage that they post. If they don't want people to talk about the garbage that they post, maybe they shouldn't post garbage.
That's my character. I'm the trash man. I come out, I throw trash all over the ring, and then I start eating garbage. And then I pick up the trash can and I smash the guy on the head.
Oh, that's gonna be a disaster.
But speaking of TheGamer's garbage, perhaps the most insulting article I've ever read was posted there the other day. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. As a fan of video games and a longtime gamer, and as someone who wants what's best for the industry, this article is quite literally the most insulting thing I've ever read. And before you say something like, oh, they let anybody write for TheGamer these days, this is written by the editor-in-chief. The editor-in-chief of one of the biggest outlets in games journalism is about to tell us why 30 FPS in the current year on the most powerful console ever made is actually a-okay. And it gets much worse than that. We're gonna read this whole thing together, and it's going to get really, really ugly. But there's one thing I want to just get out on the table before we even start, okay? If 30 FPS in 2023 was actually not a big deal, like this, people are just exaggerating, people are overreacting, it's completely fine for it to be 30 FPS. If that were the case, why would Arcane feel the need to tell us about it before the game came out? If 30 FPS really was just a piece of manufactured outrage like this fucking article is about to try and make it seem like, why would Arcane tell us about it before launch? Just keep that in mind as we read this piece of shit. Because this is a piece of shit. Game journalists are some of the most entitled people on the entire internet. And it amazes me that people with this much disdain for gamers are not only working for these outlets, but they are the editor-in-chief. But what disdain am I talking about? What garbage am I referring to? Well, let's just get started, shall we? Redfall will be launching without performance mode on Xbox, which is a bad deal however you slice it. And yet we're going to attack gamers for an entire article for being upset about it. Xbox has been trying to make up ground on its lack of exclusives this gen, and Redfall is the first big one of a year set to include Forza, Hellblade, and Starfield. Is Hellblade coming out this year? I didn't realize that was confirmed. I mean, frankly, it could be, and Microsoft is just that bad at communicating, but I was completely unaware that game was even coming out this year. That it's a shooter game advertised in 60 FPS and it can only survive at 30 FPS on a console that boasts about being the most powerful on the market is obviously bad news, but complaining about it is being overblown, so I'm here to tell you, you don't have to care. I love this thing that game journalists do, and just arrogant ass people do, where they present the opposing argument. They present something that people are upset about, and it's almost like they agree with it, but then they basically just say psych. Like, you agree that it's bad news it's 30 FPS, you agree that it was bad to be advertised in 60 frames per second, even though it's only at 30, and you agree that the fact that the strongest console on the market is only getting 30 FPS on this game is a bad thing, but then you just flip it around and are like, you don't have to care. If you don't care, suddenly that makes it not a problem. Like, this isn't even like, how are you this bad at writing? Like, this is, how are you this bad at human communication? My colleague, Eric Switzer, has already put forward his case that all viewpoints are valid in this. Eric points out that after a decade of playing high-end PC shooters, combined with an avid interest in film, has made distinguishing between frame rates not only instinctive, but disorienting. To play with a low frame rate is even nausea-inducing. In the interest of balance, Eric also offers that when he changed his TV from an old busted 1080p display to a snazzy new 4K one, his partner didn't notice the difference for a week. Let's just take this piece by piece. Yes, playing 30 FPS first-person shooter games is disorienting and nausea-inducing. When I was still playing on the Xbox One, I was really into Gears of War 4, which is a game where the campaign runs at 30 frames per second, Horde runs at 30 frames per second, but the multiplayer ran at 60. And I had to stop playing that game because after a while, the 30 frames per second modes would give me a headache. If you don't know any better and you've never seen any better, obviously it's not going to be disorienting just by its nature. Something running at 30 frames per second to someone who never looks at anything higher than 30 frames per second is not going to be disorienting, but that's also not the target audience for a video game. So this is a non-argument. And the same goes for resolution. If I were to replace the TV downstairs in my house with a 4K TV, my wife probably wouldn't notice the difference either until I pointed it out. But the key point there is that once I did point it out and then I switched it back, she certainly would notice. But again, she's not a gamer, so this argument really doesn't matter. It's one of those things where you can only really notice it once you are looking for things like this, but also if you are avidly involved in the gaming scene, you are going to notice these things pretty regularly. But again, all this is really besides the point. If you are an avid gamer and you are used to playing games at 60 frames per second, which is most gamers, I would say 99% of actual avid gamers, there's a very good chance a 30 FPS first-person shooter is going to make you nauseous. And this is all not even mentioning the fact that a big first-party Xbox game coming out in 2023 at 30 FPS on the most powerful piece of hardware allegedly ever released to the console market is a slap in the face to everyone who was sold this thing. The Xbox One X was already outputting it at 4K 30. Why did we buy a new machine if first-party games can't even get higher than what the last console did? It's not just the nausea, it's not just the motion sickness, it's not just the us being used to something higher. It's the fact that this is a fucking insult to anyone who bought a new piece of hardware, because it was a lie. Remember when Microsoft said that 60 FPS was going to be the standard? Why did we buy a new machine if that wasn't actually going to be true? I don't think Eric is lying, either about his oblivious partner or 30 FPS induced sickness, but I do think some of you are. That's right. One person says a thing and I don't think it's a lie. Another person says a thing and it is a lie. But the first person is not lying because I know them. This is the most entitled shit I have ever heard. Someone you know says a thing, so you believe it. Someone you don't know says the exact same thing, and they are a liar now. If you are upset about 30 FPS in Redfall, you are a liar, because Stacy over here doesn't fucking know you. This is the most entitled fucking game journalist garbage I've ever read. Oh my god. From a marketing point of view, it's another bullet hole in Redfall's feat to not have the standard frame rate on console. So you agree it's standard. Wonderful. I thought we were all lying about this. Coming after the news that co-op players can't progress the story and that it requires an always online connection, even in solo mode. Add to that, it looks a little generic compared to Arcane's usual style. And now we're back to doing the usual game journalist thing, where we list a whole bunch of actual objective problems, but then get mad at gamers for acknowledging the actual objective problems. Welcome to The Gamer, where we actively fucking hate gamers. I'm not defending this as a good idea. Yeah, of course not. How would anybody get that impression? A few people have suggested future games could manipulate frame rates in ways that movies do. Into the Spider-Verse's iconic style comes from Miles being animated on twos, meaning he moves every second frame rather than every frame, giving the movie a more distinctive visual texture. The Spider-Verse skin in Sony's Spider-Man game did the same thing to great effect. Games could, it has been suggested, do the same more often. They could use slicker FPS for action sequences to sell the character's speed and slow it down when the setting is supposed to be oppressive. This isn't what's happening with Redfall though, and it also misses the point. Most players won't notice. The reason that frame rate worked in Spider-Verse is because it was a distinct art style. It was a stylistic choice. That has nothing to do with the reasons why Redfall's FPS is so dog shit. But also, the reason Spider-Verse's art style was so unique is because it was unique. If everyone did that, it wouldn't be unique anymore. But this last sentence is really what bothers me. Most players won't notice. I shouldn't even have to explain why this is so arrogant and dismissive and obnoxious and pretentious. This is like a chef at a restaurant deciding to triple the amount of salt that they're cooking with, and they have a friend who doesn't actually have a tongue. And then they just say, no one's gonna notice, my friend didn't notice it. Yeah, you know, most gamers won't notice the game running at 30 FPS because my friend's spouse doesn't notice a 4K TV. Like, how can you be so dismissive of the people that you claim to be writing for? Your website is called TheGamer. Some of you will. Some of you will get a headache and be unable to play when the game slows down. Sure, most of you are just saying it because it's the cool thing. But it's not cool. It's incredibly dorky. Not me. I'm not dorky. I'm just lying about things that I get paid to not lie about. That's not dorky. That's smart. I am the gamer editor-in-chief. Come click on my articles and give me ad revenue because I am the authority on what's cool and not cool and dorky and not dorky, and oh my god, this is so fucking stupid. I've been playing video games for 2 decades and I've spoken to lots of people who are similarly obsessed with games, be they journalists. Contrary to popular belief, we do play games. Okay, the fact that you need to put that in the article shows the problem. Content creators, developers, or regular players, because that doesn't give away your mindset. Journalists, content creators, developers, or just regular players. Like, either we're all gamers or we're not. You don't get to be like, ugh, journalists really do play games contrary to popular belief, but then also feel the need to list regular gamers outside of the bubble you live in. We've discussed so many topics down the years, ranging from writing to level design, from art style to photo mode, from forgotten classics to fresh greats. Not once has someone voluntarily introduced the topic of frame rates. People just don't care until something like this is mentioned. Or, alternatively, people don't care until there's something wrong with it. You're right that frame rate is not really something that comes into conversation regularly, but that's because it's usually not hindering the experience of the game, like a 30 FPS first-person shooter would be. And also, this is, again, completely missing the point that a 30 FPS game on the Xbox Series X is a scam in itself. It is a lie from the people who sold you the machine. This conversation and this controversy is not just about the frame rate itself. It's not just about the gameplay. It's about the notion of how we got here. Redfall, like Arkane's last game, Deathloop, is far more popular among journalists than the general population. That's not really the flex you think it is. And repeated bad press and disappointing footage have seen it take quite the kicking. The frame rate debacle is another mark against it, and I have no skin in the game to defend it. Okay, so what are you doing here? Because if you're not doing this to defend the game, kinda just seems like you're doing this to talk shit about gamers, which is not great. I thought Deathloop was only okay, and Redfall isn't even my most anticipated Xbox exclusive this year. That's Hellblade, not Starfield. No surprise the game journalist is really excited for the next super mega pretentious walking simulator disguised as an actual game. I just don't think this is as big a deal as many of you are making it out, and it's okay not to care. It doesn't matter if you can't really tell. It does matter if you can't really tell, but act like you can, because that's loser behavior. But talking shit about people for criticizing objectively bad things in a modern video game, that is not loser behavior. That's just game journo behavior, which means it can't be a bad thing. Okay, look, TheGamer has always been a trash heap of a website, but the fact that the editor-in-chief wrote this is astonishing. Like, let that sink in. The editor-in-chief of TheGamer, not the freelance writer, not the new hire intern that's just shitting out articles. The editor-in-chief called you a liar for being upset that Redfall is in 30 FPS. And in the same article, feels the need to point out that, oh yes, contrary to popular belief, journalists do play games. Well, you're doing everything in your power to make it seem like you don't. This article is a disaster. This website is a disaster. And I'm really tired of people defending 30 FPS in the current year. There were N64 games that ran at consistent 60 frames per second. There is zero reason a modern day AAA shooter with the backing of Microsoft can't get up to 60 FPS on the most powerful console ever released. A console that, again, was marketed with a 60 FPS standard. It's one thing to not mind 30 FPS. I don't know how you wouldn't mind 30 FPS at this point, but it's one thing to not mind it. It's another thing entirely to openly defend it and openly insult the people who don't want it. Stop making excuses for these garbage ass decisions, because that's how nothing ever changes. Toodles.